tuned in to the Andrew Lawton Show.
Last week or 2 weeks ago, it might have been, the World Health Assembly was, as the name suggests, assembled in Geneva, Switzerland, and they were talking about all these sorts of things that on the surface sound nice. They sound good. They sound like the sorts of things that we are all going to get behind. They want to just facilitate movement around the world. Well, that's good. Who doesn't like traveling? They want to talk about all of the ins and outs of making life better or better protecting citizens. And as we've heard time and time again over the last several years, when something is for your protection, it generally comes at a cost to your mobility rights, a cost to your speech rights, a cost to your ability to make your own decisions as a citizen. And to be honest, whatever you think of the COVID hysteria that has dominated much of the world for much of the last 3 years, I would hope that everyone could kind of agree with the fact that the World Health Organization has not been a credible voice on this or on anything. It was great when their focus was on preventing malaria in the developing world, but now their focus is preventing mobility everywhere in the world. This organization that would capitulate literally and figuratively to China, that would literally hang up on a Taiwanese reporter that dares to ask about Taiwan's inclusion in the World Health Organization, which, in fairness, if I were Taiwan, I wouldn't be pushing for at this point. And an organization that believes it should be the sole decision maker on all of these things that affect the individual decisions that should belong to individual people. But increasingly, we have governments that are abdicating their obligation to their citizens, and I would say their national sovereignty, to the World Health Organization. So it's been curious that as the global leaders were talking all about this stuff in Geneva, there was very little mainstream media attention. There was very little attention at all. I should say, first and foremost, I had been looking into going to Geneva to cover it myself, but when I looked at the agenda for the meetings and I looked at the documents, a lot of the stuff that people were interested in wasn't appearing there. There wasn't a lot of talk on the agenda about the global pandemic treaty that's coming into force next year, hopefully. There wasn't a lot of discussion about global vaccine passports, but the joke was on me because all of these things were discussed. They just didn't want to draw attention to them. Well, I'm glad that one woman who was there to shine a light on this is with us today. Michele Bachmann, former U.S. Congresswoman, former Republican presidential candidate, and now the Dean of the School of Government at Regent University, joins me. She was in the belly of the beast, and more importantly, she's also my cruise mate on the Mark Stein cruises last couple of years, and we're going to be sailing again in a few weeks' time. Michele, it is great to talk to you. Thanks for coming on today.
So good to be with you, Andrew. Thanks for having me on today.
So let's just start with why you went there, because I would imagine that you were probably not a popular voice there as someone who is speaking out against a lot of the very things that these people have been pushing for with, sadly, a fair bit of success the last few years.
Well, I wanted to go because of how consequential this meeting is. These kind of meetings drive me crazy. I have no interest in being in meetings, gobbledygook, let's have a bigger and better bureaucracy. But this is more than just changing a bureaucracy of the subset of the United Nations dealing with healthcare. That's what this is. The United Nations healthcare arm is called the World Health Organization. They've always been an advisory only body. And so countries had the ability to just reject whatever they said or adopt it if they thought this was a good thing. And it was a fairly inconsequential organization. You can see the good altruistic purpose for it. If there's an area in the world that needs help, nations of the world can band together to try and help that area. That's all good. But now this is a malevolent plan to take the World Health Organization and supercharge it to the global surveillance system, the global tracking system, the global tracing system of all people on Earth. And we had that not only in Geneva, but an announcement was made yesterday, Andrew, from the European Commission. Basically, in Brussels and the European Union, they made an announcement together with the World Health Organization that the World Health Organization would adopt the global digital passports that have been created in Brussels for the use of the 80 nations in the European Union. But now the World Health Organization is going to take that example of a global digital passport where everyone has a digital ID on their phone and they've got a QR code, and then we'll be tracked and traced by all of that. That announcement was made yesterday. This is very curious to me because at the G20 last November, the health minister of Indonesia made this very casual offhand remark at the G20 that the top G20 nations have gotten together. We've all decided we're going to have global digital passports. They will be put forth by the World Health Organization. We'll adopt amendments in May in Geneva, and we're just going to go ahead and have this surveillance. Well, it didn't happen in Geneva. And so they waited till after all of the votes were taken, if they took any votes. They didn't take any votes on the proposed 307 amendments to the international health rules. They didn't take any votes on the global pandemic treaty. They waited till about a week after the whole shebang was over. And then they announced in a press release, oh, by the way, we're going to empower the World Health Organization. Now they're going to be the ones in charge of this digital healthcare passport. And they'll be the ones in the process of tracking and tracing and surveilling the rest of us and giving permission if we can get on a public conveyance like a plane and go somewhere, while they also call the shots on what vaccines we have to have and boosters and whatever they come up with.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that timeline, because I was just saying in my intro on this segment that I looked at the agenda and ultimately decided it wasn't going to be worth going because the things they were talking about on the agenda were not the things that we're talking about now. And as I said, I mean, foolish on my part, because ultimately this was exactly the purpose. But you're right that they do it in this way where I have to assume that the public agenda was taking place alongside this parallel agenda where these folks were all talking behind closed doors and all agreeing to what then gets announced 2 weeks later that no one voted on, was not subject to scrutiny, people could not really question it about. And this is really the story of the WHO, is it not? That, they say they're this democratic body, the product of states, but really all the action seems to take place outside of that democratic forum.
Oh, it does. You're right. We're living in a post-democratic environment. That's what the WHO is. They despise the issue of democracy and of the delegates that were there. As a matter of fact, it was 194 nations, essentially all nations on earth who are members of the WHO, and they were all like a bunch of bobblehead dolls. Every single one of the delegates were reading off of basically the same script. They used the word urgent, inclusion, equity. In other words, we're going to have outcome-based socialized medicine for the world, a concept known as universal health. So socialized medicine for the world, everybody gets the same level of health care. And so all these little poorer nations think, great, this will be wonderful. We'll all get American-style health care. What they don't realize is that healthcare is about to be downgraded, particularly in the West, and it'll be outcome-based. So no one is getting high quality healthcare except for the John Kerrys of the world and the elites of the world who will have their own healthcare system. And as a matter of fact, that was one of the shocking things to me. You're right. The main event didn't happen in conferences A or B or the plenary sessions. Where the real rubber hit the road were in these strategic roundtables, kind of optional meetings. But they clearly laid out their timeline, their content, their strategy, and they talked about the 307 amendments to the international health rules. The fellow in charge of passing them is Dr. Abdullah Asiri. And he said, well, during the next pandemic, and they all talked about the next pandemic. Remember, it was 100 years from the Spanish flu until COVID, but they're talking about the next pandemic.
Oh, they talk about it as though it's like coming out next week. I mean, they got excited about monkeypox because they thought they had like another thing that they could get involved in.
Yeah, no, exactly. And Dr. Asiri said, we can't, with the next pandemic, we can't use the old international health rules. We have to have new, bold, strong health rules, because the problem with the last pandemic was civil liberties. People had too many civil liberties. So we've got to diminish and take away people's civil liberties. You can find this, you can go to who.int, click on 76 World Health Assembly, and then look at the strategic roundtables, the very first one on Monday, and you too can hear Dr. Asiri say the problem is too many civil liberties and we got to get rid of them. One of the amendments does just that. They scratch out the words in the international health rules, human freedom, human dignity, protection of civil liberties. That's gone. This is a post-democratic world. All they care about is empowering the World Health Organization. So it really is the global Gestapo is probably a terrible word, but the global police, if you will, for healthcare. They call the shots, not the individual nation states anymore on healthcare decisions or the ability to call an emergency. Remember, in the United States, for instance, we lived under emergency powers for 3 years. Yeah. Emergency powers were only recently lifted May 11th of 2023. This would give the right to dictate emergency powers to the World Health Organization, and then they can virtually do anything they want.
Let me ask you, Michele, why countries are not more resistant to this? Because, I mean, theoretically, a country could do what the United States was going to do had Donald Trump been reelected, which is withdraw from the WHO entirely. They have that right. But what we saw was countries increasingly abdicating their own decision-making to the WHO. I mean, we also saw corporations do that. I mean, if you were to have a conversation about COVID on YouTube, YouTube is going to throw up a misinformation label, and they're going to say, you violated what the World Health Organization sets out as being best practices. So why were countries doing this? Because surely individual nation states realize that this is not in their best interest to give this much power to an unelected non-doctor bureaucrat, that Tedros Adhanom guy.
Well, it's a few things, Andrew. We all know that the Communist Party of China has global reach and global ambitions, and they've been, with their Belt and Road Initiative, buying off Latin American countries, South American countries, African countries. So they go in.
Well, even some European countries. The Belt and Road is global now, yeah.
It is. It's a global effort, and they will say, well, we'll pay for this airport for you. We'll pay for this highway for you. We will take care of this infrastructure with you. You just sign here on the dotted line for your loan, wink, wink, and we'll put this in for you. Well, a lot of these countries are used to loan forgiveness. The United States, for instance, has done a lot of loan forgiveness. China isn't quite there. They're not the ones who are going to do the loan forgiveness. So the number one entity that calls the shots at the World Health Organization is the Communist Party of China. And so this is something that they want because this is the Chinese system. This is the Chinese social credit system. It is how China controls their own people. So now this system that China has in place, this digital surveillance, is exactly what's being implemented through the WHO, only it's meant for all nations globally. Why would the United States do this? Joe Biden was the lead aggressor a year ago, trying to introduce 29 amendments to completely pivot the purpose of the WHO away from being an advisory-only body to be a regulatory and enforcement body when it came to health emergencies. So that was last year. Then Botswana and a few African nations objected. So we got a reprieve for a year, but we really didn't, because behind the scenes, they were putting all of this into place. And then this year when I went, I fully expected that they would pass these amendments and pass the Global Pandemic Treaty. It was clear from day one they were not going to pass it. They were going to wait until 2024. But that's a head fake, Andrew, because 1 week after they ended the World Health Assembly, they had a press conference yesterday, or they issued a press release and announced that the WHO would take over the global digital passport. And that's really all you need for effectively global governance or global surveillance, because if the WHO controls the terms and the enforcement, they really are creating a platform for global governance. And they're doing it through the global digital passport, because you're not traveling, you're not getting on a plane, you're not able to do things you were used to doing unless your QR code is up to date and approved by the WHO.
Yeah, and the way they couch it in all of these things is about being for your convenience. They basically say that you do this and it's going to make it a little bit more helpful. You know, the airline that I travel with more often than not, they've done this digital ID pilot project where when you log in, they say, "Oh, if you'd like, you can do a facial scan on your phone and then you can actually board the airplane more conveniently because we'll just take a picture of your face there and that will open the gate." And it's like I'm looking at this and I'm saying, first off, the voluntary never stays voluntary. So this little like thing you can try if you want is going to become mandatory in 6 months time. But also when you trade away things in the name of convenience, you will end up realizing that it had nothing to do with that. That was just PR. And that's the whole thing with these global vaccine passports. We shouldn't be making it easy for states and IOs like the WHO to standardize this stuff.
Well, this is really serious, Andrew. People need to understand how far down the road this is. Global socialized medicine isn't pretty, and that's what they plan. Universal health being global socialized medicine. The criterion for healthcare decisions is a concept known as One Health, and they had a diagram, and the diagram includes man, animals, the environment. And so when you look into it, the healthcare criterion is man is worth no more, is no more valuable than an animal. Man is no more valuable than a lump of dirt. So it's essentially man equals a cockroach, each equals a lump of dirt. But in the final analysis,
I have to jump in there. So for Canadians that deal with wait times, now we have to wait behind a tree for our surgery, basically.
Well, basically, because now at this point, John Kerry made an appearance at this World Health Assembly, and both Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus and John Kerry said that, we had focused on infectious diseases. Well, yeah, 3 years, COVID-19, we'd focused on infectious diseases, but now we're going to turn away from that. Now we're going to pivot and we're going to focus on climate change. And really, here's the bottom line. These climate change people have been desperate to put a control system into place, effectively a global government, on the basis of climate change. Nobody bought it. For 60 or 70 years, nobody cared. They didn't buy it. But after COVID, these climate change people saw how effective you could control people globally through healthcare. So on day 2 of the Strategic Roundtable, John Kerry comes in and he says, I didn't realize that healthcare is really driven by climate change. I had no idea until my daughter told me. And so Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus said the same thing. Yeah, we're going to pivot away from infectious diseases. Our number one priority now at World Health is climate change. And that's what John Kerry said. So now the number one factor for the WHO will be, can we keep the Earth's temperature at rising no more than 1.5 degrees? So in that case, the lump of dirt equals a cockroach equals mankind. What that says is the lump of dirt is going to win every time. So whatever it is that the elites who control the World Health Organization want, they will make the decisions. It's not up to the 194 nations anymore. It's up to these elites, because in the Global Pandemic Treaty, they create this little group of elites called like the Council of the Parties or the Commission of the Parties, something like that. And they arrogate to themselves perpetual rule-making authority. They never have to meet again for the World Health Assembly. This little commission on the parties will meet with perpetual authority, and they'll just create the rules to give the WHO more power and more power and more power. And the sick thing is that, led by Joe Biden in the United States, all these nations are willingly, voluntarily giving up their sovereignty over healthcare decision-making. It is a fatal, ridiculous, tragic decision. And so, you may have a global audience. I hope you do, Andrew, because people in other countries, people in Canada, this is the time now to wake up and realize we're very far down the road with this thing, because now the World Health Organization is calling the shots for the EU. And they're already announcing they're going to call the shots for all of the other nations that join in on this global digital passport. And the ability to travel is contained in that. Our health records will be contained in it. Most likely, our digital currency will be contained in it. Perhaps even the right to buy and sell will be contained in it. It's extremely serious, and it's how you can control people. And it's already off the ground. And yesterday, they made the announcement that the WHO is controlling this without a vote. They just grabbed the power.
You know, if I were the leader of an African medical group, I'd be very angry that no one cares about the HIV outbreak anymore. No one cares about the malaria outbreak, that they all care about, you know, shutting down oil refineries in Alberta and West Virginia or wherever they are. Michele Bachmann, I'm so glad you went there when no one else in the world was interested in covering this. It's wonderful to see you again. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.